Let me introduce myself. My name is Dave Elving. I'm the interim executive director here at San Francisco Camerawork, and it's wonderful to see you here on a Saturday afternoon. As ever, it's great to see you virtually, even though we can't be together physically. Seeing all of your faces really reaffirms our community, and it's great. Today, we're going to be looking at Question Bridge Black Males. It's an innovative transmedia project launched in 2012 that facilitates a dialogue between Black men from diverse and contending backgrounds and creates a platform for them to represent and redefine Black male identity in America. We're excited to share this with you today. If you have a question during the presentation, please post them in the Zoom chat. We'll get to them later this afternoon. We'll have time for that discussion. And during that discussion, you're welcome to unmute and participate. Do be aware that we are recording this presentation so we can share it with those who aren't able to tune in live. So please feel free to keep your cameras off if you'd like. And please remain on mute during the presentation until we're ready to kick it over to questions. With that, to introduce our speakers today, I'd like to hand it over to our board president, Michelle Branch, to do that introduction. Michelle.
Thanks, Dave. Really appreciate it. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Excited to see you today. So today, I'm really honored to be able to introduce Chris Johnson and Elena Gross. Chris has recently posted an Instagram takeover series with SF Camerawork. So I hope that on Instagram, you will toggle over and take a look at that at a later point to see his work. There are some experts from Question Bridge Black Males, along with some other work from throughout his career. There's some really powerful images there. And that Instagram takeover series is part of our commitment to Black image makers, which you could read more about on our website at Camerawork. So I'm really honored to be able to introduce Chris and Elena, as I was saying earlier. So Elena Gross, her pronouns are she and they, is an independent writer and culture critic living in Oakland, California. Elena received an MA in Visual and Critical Studies from the California College of the Arts in 2016, and her BA in Art History and Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies from St. Mary's College of Maryland in 2012. She specializes in representations of identity in fine art, photography, and popular media. Elena was formerly the creator and co-host of the Arts and Visual Culture podcast, What Are You Looking At?, published by Art Practical. Her research has been centered around conceptual and material abstractions of the body in the work of Black modern and contemporary artists. She has presented her writing and research at institutions and conferences across the United States, including Nook Gallery, Southern Exposure, Caddist, Harvard College, Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, California College of the Arts, and the GLBT History Museum. In 2018, Elena collaborated with the artist Layla Weafer on the publication Between Beauty and Horror, published by Sning Sning Books. The two performed a live adaptation of their work at the Lab in San Francisco, and Elena's most recent writing can be found in the forthcoming publication, This Is Not a Gun, published by Sning Sning Books and Candor Arts. So excited to hand it over to Elena in a few minutes. Now, Chris Johnson, I'm also, again, excited to introduce because you should know that Chris was actually a past president of SF Camerawork. So I'm the current board president and Chris is a past president. And I have a lot of questions for Chris about the history of Camerawork, which we'll probably talk about as well a little bit later. So stay tuned for that in the Q&A. But Chris originated the Question Bridge concept with a 1996 video installation that he created for the Museum of Photographic Arts and the Malcolm X Library in San Diego, California. His photographic artwork has been published and exhibited at the Smithsonian Institute, the Oakland Museum, and numerous galleries, and is represented in collections, including the Center for Creative Photography in Tucson, Arizona, and the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. In 1994, Chris co-produced and directed The Roof is on Fire with Suzanne Lacey, which was broadcast on KRON TV. Chris Johnson has served as president of San Francisco Camerawork Gallery, the chair of Cultural Affairs Commission for the City of Oakland under Jerry Brown, and the director of Mother Jones's International Fund for Documentary Photography. Additionally, Chris authored the Practical Zone System for Documentary Photography, currently in its 6th edition. He is right now the chair and a full professor of photography at the California College of the Arts, where for 10 years he served as president of the Faculty Senate. I'm seeing a pattern here with presidencies and leadership in photography and in arts organizations. Chris is also the Media Wall project manager and public arts management team member for the Oakland Museum and the Port of Oakland. So again, really honored to have Chris with us today and to learn more about his work. And Elena, I'm really excited that you're here. I've gotten to know Elena through Museum of the African Diaspora and also through her writing and work across the San Francisco Bay Area and also nationally and internationally. And we're really proud to have Elena here as part of our programming committee with San Francisco Camerawork. So I want to welcome Elena and hand the conversation over to her.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Dave, both of you for your introductions. I'm really excited to be a part of this event and to continue a relationship with SF Camerawork. It's been very fun the last few weeks getting to be a part of the programming committee. And with Chris Johnson's work, it's interesting. We didn't overlap while I was at CCA, except for hearing fantastic things about Chris's scholarship and the work that he does. But I was given the chance to hear him speak about this project, about Question Bridge a little bit. So I was able to see parts of it at the Oakland Museum, and then I was also able to hear him speak a little bit about the project this past February at MOAD for our Engage Symposium. And so I'm really excited to be able to present this work again and to really be able to be in conversation with Chris about it, because I feel like it's a project that feels especially urgent and prescient right now. And so it'll be great to kind of take a look at it. So the first thing I want to do is I want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to experience some part of the video in the event that I know we were encouraged to watch the video ahead of time, but everybody has a busy week. Quarantine has a way of what is time? So I want to make sure that we get some time to spend. We get to spend some time with that project before we jump into questions. And there will be a Q. So after we screen a bit of the project, then Chris and I will chat for about 30 minutes, and then we'll turn it over to Q&A. So please start thinking of your questions now, and feel free to drop them in the chat as we screen an excerpt from Question Bridge Blackmails. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris. I don't know if you'd like to say a few words first to kind of introduce the project, give it a little context, and then we will watch about 30-minute clip.
Well, hello, it's great to be back at Camerawork again. It's been something like 31, 40 years since I've been.
I want you to watch it.
But I thought that, and first of all, I want to say I really want to thank Camerawork for inviting me back to talk about this work. It is kind of a loop back for me. It's a great honor to be involved with this. And I thought that what I would do was share with you a little history about the origins of the project and then the project itself. As Elena said, just an excerpt from it. So what I'm going to do is share my screen with you and give you a little history lesson about my work and the origins of the Question Bridge project. Okay, so hopefully you're seeing my screen and you're seeing a picture of me when I first arrived in San Francisco. So that's the person that Camerawork knew back in those days. A few changes. And I want to begin by just giving some honors to the people who were my teachers and mentors and friends. I got the chance to study with Ansel Adams and Imogen Cunningham, and most especially my friend Wynn Bullock. And just as a little bit of background, here's a little bit of the work that I did before I entered the realm of social justice practice. So I was a portrait photographer, a very earnest portrait photographer. This is some of the work that I did. If you can't read the text, it says, "This is of my mother. After years of silence and painful distance between us, I wanted her to see the important places of my life. When Yosemite came into view, she cried. She reluctantly agreed when I asked her to pose in front of a dead tree." Then a few months later, when her hair grew back after chemotherapy, we were surprised at how soft it felt. After we danced at my sister's wedding, I had to carry her down the stairs from the reception. We had never seen fear in her eyes before. This was 6 years later, actually. And then a few months after that, a month before she died, she looked at me. We knew we were seeing each other for the last time. So this is pretty representative of the kind of portrait work that I did. This is a newer project done for the Oakland Museum. It's called A Question of Faith. It's a combination of Dorothea Lange photographs that I found and that great quote that Martin Luther King made famous. And it was also a billboard project. So that's a quick summary of my career before the origins of the Question Bridge project. And you know, any art project of significance begins with a transformative experience. And so I want to share this photograph that some of you who are photographers may know. This is the work of Roy de Carava. So I use this as a way of giving you a sense of how I grew up as a kid in Brooklyn. This, I'm pretty sure, is a little girl, but this is certainly the way I felt coming from a Black neighborhood in Bed-Stuy. I love the kind of aspirational implication of the stairway behind the child. And this is the way Bed-Stuy felt to me in the 50s and 60s. A community of working class people where mothers could walk their children to school. This is photographed by Bruce Davidson. Soon as the fair housing laws passed, the Black middle class largely left, and so it created a schism that I witnessed. So I give you that history as a way of explaining the project as it evolved. So that division of the Black community into those who could leave and did, and those who chose not to, was something that was a powerful experience in my life. And then Suzanne Lacy, a really well-known feminist, performance artist, theorist, educator, came to my school as a dean. And we ended up collaborating on a project that some of you may remember was called The Roof is on Fire. This is the first time that I'd ever considered art practice as an agent of social change. What we wanted to do was try to activate the voices of young African-American, primarily kids. And so we got hundreds of them on a rooftop in cars in downtown Oakland. And we put badges around their necks that said, "Shut up and listen." And with that context, we invited them just to talk to each other very frankly about issues in their lives. And they did that with the kind of protective bubble around them that allowed them to speak freely. And it allowed the mainly white audience to listen. So that idea of activating listening as a, for some reason, okay. So here you see, you went until sundown and the young people just talked very freely. So it was a really eye-opening experience for both the kids and for the audience. So what happened next is that that piece not only identified me in the art community as a performance artist, but it also came to the attention of Arthur Ullman and a curator named Rick Bolton down at the Museum of Photographic Arts in San Diego. And they asked me to come and create something that would correspond with the Republican convention that was happening in 1996. So I went back to that formative experience of the Black community dividing into those who chose to stay in the hood and those who left. And I tried to say to myself, like, what would be a process that would allow them to communicate with each other? My goal was to try to create some kind of healing conversation. And the Roof is on Fire project was based on listening as a kind of passive form for people to be generous. And I thought, well, you know, what's an active form of generosity? And asking a question is a way to do that. So I thought I might be able to create a question bridge between African Americans in the hood and those who live in the suburbs. If I told them, just look into the camera, visualize a person living a very different lifestyle, and ask them a question, and you will get a chance to answer a question and from them. So that's the experiment that I created in 1996. And this is the very crude way that it looked back then. I'll show you an excerpt of it.
Have you given any thought to where the money comes from for people who are receiving public assistance? And do you care?
I thought about where public assistance money comes from, and I do care. But for one, I am on public assistance, and it's not because we don't want to work. It's not because we want to sit at home and get a check or anything like that. A lot of people perceive us young teenage mothers to sit at home and just collect a check, where a lot of times we do go out and look for work. We do work. We can't work as long because childcare is really up there. At this point in time, I pay $300 a month for one child, and I have two, and I pay $158 a month for another child. The $300 is because my child is under 2. The $150 is because my child is over 2 and is school age. So yes, I know where the money comes from taxpayers, but we do have people who take up American jobs who are not taxpayers because they're not an American citizen. How about that? We get decreases in our checks because we're American citizens, but yet if you're a refugee or you're an immigrant or you're able working alien, legal working alien in the United States, you get an increase in your check when you come over here from different countries, because the United States government have so-called some kind of agreement with them. They come over here and they're able to get grants to start businesses where we are already living here, working, doing the backbone of the country, and we don't get that same type of respect. But yet people look down upon us because we are on public assistance. They like to say, oh, the Black teenage moms are going out opening their legs and having babies just to get on welfare to get out the house. That is not always the case. It's a small proportion that does that, but you only focus on this small proportion.
So you have to imagine me behind the camera, realizing that, first of all, the fact that the man was willing to ask such a strong question that, obviously is in the minds of a lot of middle-class African Americans, and that Keona Johnson was willing to express so much passion and so articulately, I realized that this experiment was working. And so that's how Question Bridge as a concept was born. And I have to say, I made an effort to try to make it happen on a bigger scale. But to be honest, life took over and I went back to school and doing things, elsewhere. And it might have stayed exactly that, an interesting idea, until this man came into my life. So Hank Willis Thomas came to CCA as a graduate student. His mom and I were friends. She curated a lot of my work. He saw that earlier project and had the idea that maybe it should be revived. So about 12 years after the original project, it was Hank who called me up and said, I've got a grant from the Tribeca Foundation. How would you think about doing another version of that project, but this time focusing on Black men? And you saw how strong the voice of African-American women were in that original project. So it took some persuading for me to think about doing a Question Bridge project within that demographic. But if you know anything about Hank and his work, he's an incredibly energetic and creative man. His work is motivated by the death of his cousin, who was killed for a gold chain. And so a lot of his work passionately deals with issues related to concerns within the African-American community. And so he and I formed a collaboration. So these are examples of Hank's work. Another ex-graduate student and good friend of Hank's is Baite Ross Smith. Baite's work deals with code switching, among other issues. So we formed a team and decided to use the money to begin the project. Another collaborator who came into the project was the brilliant Kamal Sinclair. She is an MBA, but also a dancer, a choreographer, and a writer. And so that's the team. And so this is the way the Question Bridge notion, the concept, applied to Black men when we began traveling around the country. This is just one excerpt from it.
You know, I wonder, Black man, are you really ready for freedom? And if not, what will it take for you to want and need this freedom?
So that was a question asked in a library in Birmingham, Alabama. And then a couple of years later, I worked my way into prison. I'm doing prison work, and I got this answer from one of the inmates to that question.
Am I ready for freedom? And what would it take for me to want that freedom? First, I would have to stop and ask myself, and I would have to, that's a tough question. Because freedom to me is a mind state, you know, because you got some people that's not in jail, that's not free. You know, you got people that's in prison in dysfunctional relationships. You got people that's in prison with jobs, they work 9 to 5 that they don't like. Some people are in prison with alcohol and drug abuse. So I would have to really ask myself, what's in prison in me? And what's been in prison in me is my self-esteem, my lack of self-esteem. My lack of self-esteem has led me to commit crime, to hurt people, to manipulate people, right? Because if I love myself, there's no way I could walk outside this room and punch somebody if I'm esteemed within myself. So to be free to me would have to be, I would have to change, you know? So in order for me to grow, I'd have to change, because if change is necessary for growth, in order for me to grow, I would have to adapt the mentality that something's got to change in me. I have to change my mind state. I'd have to change the way I talk. I have to change the people I interact with. That would be free.
So this is the way Question Bridge Black Males actually came into being. So we became a portable studio. So there's Bayate doing the audio, that's me behind the camera. And we simply spent 4 years of summers traveling around the country to 11 different cities, ended up encountering over 160 individual men. So this is the way the process worked. So here's Hank on the computer looking at a pool of questions that he's directing at sitters while I was behind the camera. This is the way the, if you will, sort of the brain trust of Question Bridge came into being. We were invited to be part of the 2010 BAVAC Producers Institute, where we got a chance to share our ideas and really understood for the first time that what we had was not only a powerful document about Black males, but a transmedia project that could exist in many, many different forms. It ended up premiering at the Oakland Museum, the Brooklyn Museum, the Sundance Film Festival, the Utah Museum of Contemporary Art, and a gallery in Atlanta, all at the same time in 2012. We're very honored to be in the permanent collection at the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, which feels a little bit like a culmination, to be honest. It's also a book published by Aperture. And as I mentioned, it's become a transmedia project, so it exists as an installation. The Oakland Museum is currently closed, so I really encourage any of you who want to see the whole thing to use the link that Camerawork provides. But there's a very energetic program of community events and of the website, and there's a curriculum that I'll talk more about in a moment. This is a little bit of the way it looked at the Brooklyn Museum. This is the way it looked at the Sundance Film Festival. This is one of the events that I created called the Blueprint Roundtable, where we brought elders and youths together to have a live question bridge process. Needless to say, it draws big audiences. There's the website, which I'll be showing you in a moment. There's a mobile app that allows Black men to look at questions and provide answers. This is all still live. Recently, at Bayview Hunters Point, we did a large outdoor presentation of Question Bridge. So Question Bridge as an installation and a website are still very, very much alive. So here's the website, and I want to show you a couple of slides because one of the other really fascinating adjuncts to the project is the fact that when you go to the website and click on the Explore button, it takes you to the collection of not only all of the clips that we did, but also clips that Black men from around the country are submitting and providing answers. How do you mend a broken heart? I mean, a lot of the questions and answers are very personal, very powerful. So I'm not going to play these for you, but I encourage you to explore the website and you'll see, it's a very rich and poignant dialogue. And then there's the Question Bridge curriculum, something I'm really excited about because teachers immediately understood that, and this is something that Elena said, and it's tragically true, that as relevant as this felt in 2012 when it premieres, it feels even more pertinent and relevant now. And educators understood, that the opportunity that the Question Bridge project offers them to show the inner life of African-American men to children was very compelling. So a team headed by Kamal and these 3 brilliant women created the Question Bridge curriculum. Recently, I collaborated with this man, James Ford, in North Carolina to totally revamp the original curriculum to create the curriculum tools. These are exercises that teachers are doing, guided by the materials that we presented for them. These are all available for free. The Gantt Museum, Harvey Gantt Center in Charlotte, North Carolina, is partnering with me to have this integrated into the Charlotte-Mecklenburg school system. So this is the first time that I'm aware of that an art project is actually formally integrated into a school system. And we did it via these programs that we did last year. And here's me with my team of developers in Charlotte. Here are teachers who were there studying the project, talking about how to build it into their classes. And that's it. So, oh, this is a little graphic we put together just to show that we use Black men for a concept that obviously applies to all human beings. So there. So that's a little background about me and to how it began. And I thought what I would do, as Elena mentioned, is share with you. So this is the website. And just, I certainly encourage everyone to go. It's a very robust website. And so you need a really strong internet connection and the Chrome browser works the best. So this is what I meant about the access to the curriculum. So if you're an educator and are interested in downloading our curriculum, there are lesson plans and workbooks that you can use. But the landing page takes you to a 30-minute excerpt. So if you haven't had a chance to see the project, and if you're in the Bay Area, the only place you could see it live would be at the Oakland Museum, which of course is closed. But we've given you a link to the full feature film, which is about 3 hours. But here's an excerpt from it so that you'll know what we're talking about.
I have a question for you. What does it mean to you to be a Black male?
What is your purpose in life?
How do we reclaim our communities?
At what point do young people stop respecting their elders?
What are you doing to make your world, your community, a better place?
How do we break the cycle?
Why?
Why?
Why do so many of us live in the present tense?
What is the last word that we can remember you by as a Black man? For your last day on this earth, what is a word that we can remember you by?
The last word as a Black man that I would like to be remembered by is warrior.
Sincere,
Motivated, dedicated,
proper balance,
family-oriented, honesty.
and as a student of Baha'u'llah,
he's seen the light and changed.
creative, because if you don't know, man, I'm the creator.
Thoughtful,
Responsibility.
empowering,
Danny Simmons, artist.
Father, I think, is the greatest thing a Black man can be. Father.
I want to ask you a question, especially to my Black men out there. Do you feel that you were deprived from your father if your father wasn't in your life? Do you blame your mother because she just wanted a baby and she didn't want a father figure or didn't have the ability to keep a father? But lastly, I want to ask you, did it make you a different man? Do you think your life is different because your father was not in your life? And do you blame your mom because she didn't want that part of your life? I wonder.
How I feel about my dad is I care for him, but I just don't feel it for him, like, not at all. Like, because the things he do and the way he act and the way he do things, but I do love both of them. I don't blame my mom. I don't blame my dad. People are who they are. But me and my dad, we just don't connect, like, and that's how it is. And it had made me a different person. I am different, and I like want to be better than my kids in the future, and those type of things, like, and it had made me a different person. I seen how to be a man quicker, how to do things without a dad. Like, a lot of people don't have dads, so if you do, like, take that into consideration if you have a good dad. Like,
No, I don't blame my mom, or I don't blame my dad. I think things happen just how they was meant to happen. You know, my dad wasn't a part of my life, but I chose to get better from it, not bitter from it, right? He taught me how to be a father because he wasn't around. You know what I mean? So now I'm able to give my daughters what I didn't have as a father. You know what I mean? And I know now, and I could tell, now that I think about that question, man, I could give my kids what I didn't have. And maybe what I didn't have is not what my kids need. You know what I mean? I could give them my love, my understanding, and my experience, right? Because maybe that's what they need, you know? So I know I want the best for my kids, right? So if I know they want the best, then they don't have to settle for less than the best, right? So, I don't blame anybody. I don't blame my mother or my dad. My mom did the best she could.
Well, I think that it's not really on your mother. I mean, my dad wasn't around for a long time, but it wasn't because he didn't want to be. It was because he was in jail. I mean, it might have been a few times that my mom did push him away and didn't allow him to come through. But at the end of the day, I touched bases with him and I made sure our relationship was still tight. So just can't go around, I guess, blaming other people. I mean, sometimes people make mistakes. As long as you touch bases with them and let them know that you still love them, I don't see why it should be a problem.
Well, that's a very good question. I will be the first to admit I'm 58 years old now, and okay, I'll be the first to admit I'm 58 years old now, and I still have father issues. My father was not in my life. I can't say I blame my mother for that. You know, my mother's white, my father's black. I have vague recollections of him. My father's from Haiti. I don't know if he's dead or alive. I mean, my recollections of him specifically are very vague. There were other men around me. Sometimes as I was growing up, my mother had other friends and people that she had relationships with. It's ironic that you mentioned the father thing, because as a grown man, at the age of 30, I sort of latched on to this elder who actually became a father to me, you know, and that's a good thing. And I consider myself very blessed about that. I benefited from the fathers that my friends had, you know, strong brothers that I looked up to. And I would say I benefited from that. You know, I'm an only child. I didn't have any siblings that I knew about. But I certainly don't blame my mother. You know, she did what she could. And but do I think I would have been a different person if perhaps my father had been in my life from day one all the way until? Undoubtedly, in some ways. But I think because of the father figures that I sort of chose, I made some good choices. So I'm good.
I have a question. How do you know when you become a man?
Wow, that's a deep question for such a young person. How would you know when you become a man? Well, basically, responsibility. You're able to take on, assume responsibility, hold fast to your commitments to yourself first, your family, and the community in which you live in. And if you can do those things, you're on your way to manhood.
The question of when you become a man, you're born a man. When you become of age may be a more relevant question, but some of us become of age many times throughout the course of their lives. I thought that I was a man at 21, ready to write memoirs of all my experience, you know. And so I don't know how many times that I thought I knew the answer to everything. And so I'm here again, thinking that I know it all, but you'll know.
Young man, there are a couple of different factors that make you a man. You have to be financially stable. That's one. You definitely got to have your own place, own roof over your head. You have to go to college. You know, it's for all the young men out there. I mean, that's one step that you got to take in order to lead to financial stability. And you have to be taking care of yourself and buy your mama a house. Then you become a man.
I think sometimes I still try to answer that question, whether or not I've become a man. I grew up in a single family home without a father, but I'm the youngest of 7, and I have 6 older brothers who taught me about being a man. And so part of that is trying to be responsible to my family and to my loved ones, and being a responsible citizen. But I think each of us have to find our own way to that path of what it means to be a man.
Young brother, I knew I became a man when I had to take on certain responsibilities and obligations, family, community, and otherwise.
Oh, that's a fine question there. I think that one of the mistakes that we often make is thinking that the first time that we're intimate with a woman, that now we're a man. In traditional societies, in order for boys to go into manhood, they had to go through certain rituals, which included them being prepared to fit whatever role they had in that society. If they were hunters, they learned how to hunt. If they were farmers, they learned how to farm. If they were fishermen, they learned how to fish. And when they were through with everything that prepared them to be a responsible member of that particular community, and that particular town, a village, a tribe, or whatever, they were given visible symbols of that completion. A scar on the face, a type of clothing, a type of jewelry, or something that they wore, that a woman could look at them and say, well, this person is now a man.
Youngin. I'm still trying to figure that out myself. It's tough. It's really tough. For me, I really don't know when that's gonna happen. Right now, I'm just trying to take these strides in what society thinks a man is. You know, going to school and getting a job and being able to stand on my 2 feet. It's going to be a difficult road, but it's probably going to be well worth it.
It's a clear thing, and I want you to know for everybody, the boy who knows how will always have a job, but the boy who knows why will always be the boss. You learn why in school. You learn how by somebody telling you. Tell Johnny to go over there and turn that switch. He hit the switch, the light come on. Ask him why did the light come on, then he has no more conversation. You have to teach him why the light came on.
So I teach at a university, and this question comes from that. I come across so many young Black people, but especially Black males, who seem as if they're afraid of being intelligent, like they're afraid of being smart. So here's my question, especially for the young Black men. Why are you afraid of being smart? Why are you afraid of being intelligent? Are you afraid that people are going to say that you're acting white? Are you afraid that people are going to say that you're gay because you're smart? I don't understand it. We come from a very strong tradition of Black males who are not afraid to share their intellectual gifts. I don't get that. Why do people seem so afraid?
I think that's because, well, for me, growing up in San Francisco, going to high school out here, and it's really mostly kind of diverse. So it's not that it's Black people in the class, but not that many. And the teachers there mostly call on other students because they think that African Americans don't really know the answer. You know, we're slackers, and it really gave me low confidence. So I really didn't participate in class a lot of the time.
The reason I think why Black people don't want to seem smart is because that they won't be taken serious by their friends or the guys or their environment. And Black people, well, let me say Black men, don't take school serious, and they think that school isn't really for them and they could do things outside of school. They're better at other things, and that's why Black people don't seem smart, but we are smart. That's how I see it as a Black individual man.
Most people are afraid of being smart because they're scared of getting teased, they're scared of getting talked about, they're scared of what people might try to do to them because of their smartness, and they don't want nobody probably trying to be their friend just to get that person to do their homework for them or something, or to stop getting bullied or whatever. There's a lot of reasons for people not trying to act smart.
So I can definitely say that for me, it's not about me being afraid that I seem smart or that I'm going to come off as being gay. Well, one, I am gay. So that really, I'm pretty confident about that. But I think for me, it's about, I'm scared that I won't be able to deliver after, you know, gaining this knowledge. That's all I got.
My question would be, is there a person who through a negative way of living, what I would judge as a negative way of living, poor choices, I would consider them poor choices, maybe leaving school too soon, a choice to engage in illegal activities. Is there a person in your life that through that poor example of living has influenced you to live your life differently? Is there a person like that in your life?
Yeah, I'm that person. When I look in the mirror, man, I see a person, man, that I don't want to be the person that I used to be. You know, I don't want to be the person that's dishonorable, disloyal, or out of order. You know, so since I don't want to be who I used to be, I grab home to being somebody I want to be, because change is not free. Nothing in the world is free. You know, nothing in the world is free. It even costs for me to change from who I want to be to somebody I want to be. I got to give up the old person to grab onto the new me, right? So I'm that person. I'm my own example. You know, I'm my own example of who I don't want to be.
I have to answer that there wasn't one negative person, but rather a negative personality. And it's that personality that responds oh, great, you got into Harvard. I heard they were letting more blacks in there. Or wonderful, you got into med school. I've heard that they're increasing the quota. It's that attitude that dismisses my long hours of study at night. It's that attitude that dismisses my improvise, adapt, and overcome attitude that the Marine Corps had taught. As a matter of fact, the Marine Corps was right. If you want to succeed, it's the 6 P's of life. Proper prior planning prevents piss poor performance. It's not your color, it's not your lack of the color. It's just trying hard to do what you know you can do.
Actually, I made those mistakes myself. 26 years old, I just enrolled in community college, got 18 credits. And actually what influences me now is a lot of my peers are living that negative life. I don't really have a lot of peers around me that's moving how I'm moving, as far as, you know, attending school or, you know, working towards a career. And it's not because of the, you know, they basically want to do the things that they're doing, but I think it's a lot of lack of opportunity. So that influence is really motivation, you know, so my peers motivate me to move forward in my career and move forward with my academics and all that. So that's how I would answer that question.
When I was growing up back in the days, I remember a violent incident that took place, you know, when I was about 15 years old. And it was a brutal act that was committed on a girl because she was poor. And it was an after-school fight. I remember these bully girls, you know, they saw this young girl who couldn't get her hair done and she didn't have the latest fashion. And for whatever reason, this female picked a fight with her. And I remember the whole school just was there and they surrounded. It was almost like a lynching. And this girl was terrified. And this bully female commenced on beating this female down for no reason other than her being poor. And what was terrible about this incident is that she just wasn't satisfied with beating her down. You know, she had a dress on, the victim had a dress on, and the girl pulled up her dress, and somehow she got a broomstick, and she pulled her panties off, and she shoved the broom in her vagina. And nobody did anything. And I was young at that time, and I didn't even know what to do, and it shocked me. And I said to myself, I will never, ever let that ever happen again in my community. Never will I allow a brutal act to exist in front of me, and I will not intervene. So from that negative experience that transpired over 35 years ago, it motivated me into action to have a desire to bring about love and unity within my community. And that one incident burns in my mind to this very day. And I have committed myself to striving to end the violence and the recklessness that exists within our community.
My father, he influenced me to be a better person because I can, when I was up to 14, 15, 16, 17 years old, I can mirror that I was living the same life as him. False IDs, drugs, selling guns, and that's everything he did. And it was him, not hip hop, who showed me how to use the word bitch. He showed me how to use, he showed me how to cook up crack. It was him, and one day I woke up and I said, I don't want to be this. He died because he was a genius. My father was genius. He had a degree, but he chose to live a Lex Luthor life. He just wanted to use, it seemed like he wanted to use everything for no good, creating whatever he can create. As long as it was not legal, he wanted to do it. I didn't want that for my son. I didn't want that for my life. I wanted to live past the age of 33.
That's a great question.
I grew up with a very good friend of mine since the 4th grade, who was one of my closest friends amongst a group of other young Black boys who just moved to the suburbs, and life was good, and we had idyllic settings and parks and great schools. And over time, as we got older, started listening to music, hanging out, going to parties. My friend was seduced by the darker side of living in the city and was seduced by the gangland culture of the Midwest in the 80s. Wanting the respect of the homeboys, wanting to live like they live. And over time, started making choices. made a couple of very difficult choices. And the farther he went down that path, the more of a distinction was drawn between the two ways that we're living. Fast forward a couple years, maybe a couple of decades, life starts catching up with that path. Life started accelerating for my own. And I'm comfortable with that. He probably was too. In fact, we talked about it and everything was fine when we see each other. But unfortunately, I won't get a chance to see him again. Just this past weekend, 2 days ago, he was found 5 bullets in his own business. Now, we'll never know what happened, but we do know that it did happen. And you start asking yourself, where were the diverging paths? And maybe there were several. But at the end of the day, they were identifiable.
My name is Dwayne H. Adams from Philadelphia, PA. I have a question. What's with this code of the streets? I don't understand it. How can you get shot, take a bullet from someone else, and say, I'm not going to say anything? How can you do a crime with other people and you take the time and you're doing time in prison, and these same people are not coming to visit you or helping you? How can you take the blame for someone else, period, and say, I'm not going to talk because the code of the streets? Is the streets going to help you grow and have a family? Is the streets going to help you survive with employment? Is the streets going to help you do all these other things, or do you have to look at things as an individual? So my question, once again, what is the code to the street? Because it doesn't make sense to me.
If I get shot and I take a bullet from somebody else, it's not my purpose to go tell on that person, for the simple fact that if I've done something of that nature, I'm gonna die anyway, because they beliefs. That's the trip, right? Because when you ask that question, my car been shot up. Yeah, it's a fact I know who did it, but I didn't tell when the police asked me to. For what? To me, I say, hey, well, the streets gonna take care of that. The streets will take care of that, and man, that's how it is for me, man, and that's just being honest.
Well, I think it's because it's an us against them mentality. Even though we're killing ourselves, we still look at the police and authorities as the ultimate enemy. So therefore, when something happens within our community, we still feel that we shouldn't turn ourselves over to the true enemy.
I guess I could say about that, it's like, 'cause they got a code of don't snitch, no snitching, and keep it real. But if you think about it, man, where did they put the rapists and the killers and the thieves, right? They put them in the same neighborhoods as the people that keep it real, that don't snitch. So if you love your family and you love your community, man, how could you continue to keep it real? Because that's where they put the killers, the rapists, and the molesters, right next door to the people that keep it real. So, yeah, that's crazy.
The code of the street is something that I reduce down to its most essential element, and that's the rules of the playground. We had simple rules, like you had to be loyal to your friends, you didn't tell on somebody, and you tried to be fair. They're good for a certain point in life, maybe when you're younger, but as you get older and you understand that life is more complex, you'll realize that you have to have a relationship with the police. You have to have a relationship with all of the actors in your community so that you can get the best results for your community. And committing to the code of the street would be the same as an adult committing to the idea to run their life by the simple rules of the Sandlot.
If you don't plan on being in the hood, then I guess you don't have to live by the codes of the streets. But the code of the streets is something you definitely want to pay attention to, because if you get to snitching or talking, then, you know what I mean, you're dead. So, period, point blank, man. If you ain't gonna be around, you're not planning on being around, then I wouldn't advise you to go by the whole code of the streets. But if you're in the streets all day, every day, man, you need to obey that. Straight up.
So here's one black man. Who started this? What is that? Why do black men do that? And I notice we only kind of do that in America. When I'm up in Canada working, I don't really see too many Canadian black men doing. What's that about?
That's about acknowledgement. It's solidarity. You know, the head nod, whether it's a bow or a chin up,
it's an acknowledgement of another God when we see one another.
We're just saying what's up. It's the universal acknowledgement, at least in the United States, of how to say what's up. I'm more concerned about the brothers that don't give me the nod. Those are the brothers that I wonder about. The American brothers who look the other way or put their head down when they see me coming. I want to walk by a black man. I look at every black man that I walk by, look him in his eyes, and I'm waiting to give him the nod. That's how I'm living, and that's how we should all live, as far as I'm concerned. So when they don't give me the nod, that's when I want to know what's up.
Brother, the reason why we do that is because we sure with each other, you feel me? That's my brother over there. I don't have to walk up and touch him to acknowledge him. I could let him know that I see him and I'm acknowledging him from a distance. That's why what's up? You feel me? Straight up.
That's an interesting question because when I was in college, I went to a mostly white university. And when we had orientation, it was stressed to us that when you go walk throughout the campus, you acknowledge all the Black people because there's not that many of us, right? So you see a brother walking, what's up? And that has progressed throughout my life. Like, you see a brother, hey, how you doing, brother? What's up, brother? And I think what that does is, I'm not sure who came up with that, but I think what that is an acknowledgement that I see you, I understand you, I know what you're going through. You and I have a common bond and it's unspoken. I don't even have to say anything more than, what's up, brother? I see you. I think that that's what that means. Where it came from, I'm not sure, but I'm kind of glad it's here.
My question to the Black man in America or anywhere else is, what is common to all of us that we can say makes us who we are?
I like that hat. So I think what makes us more common is that first of all, we're all Black. And I think the second thing that makes us common is that we're all Black. And the third thing that makes us common is that we're all Black. Now, in our Blackness, we have struggles that parallel one another.
There's one thing that African American men all have in common, and that is the perception of them by the white community. That perception is that you are not a man, you are less than a man, at most you are 3/5 of a man, and you are not fully to be respected, and you have no rights that are to be respected in the dominant white society.
You know, this is a tricky question because I don't want to answer this in a way where I'm going to claim that there's some type of monolithic Black man community and we have something that's common to us all. For me, speaking personally, I think that the commonality resides in the fact that I come from a very strong and rich tradition that has resisted racism in this country and has celebrated life. That's my commonality with other Black men. However, there are many, many, many things that make us different. And I think those things should be celebrated. They shouldn't be disparaged, and they should be acknowledged. So our commonality is in our history. But I think our beauty as Black people is also in our diversity.
Unfortunately, what's most common is probably our miseducation and misconception of who we are.
I could never assume that just because we look the same, that I in fact would have more in common with you than not. I think that is really on the personal level, I think it's really a misconception that if you have a group of Black men in a room, have more commonalities than differences.
What makes Black men, what is common that makes us who we are is universal, is our strength, our inner strength. And it may not seem like that sometimes, but it is because for centuries, the Black man has been used to getting beat down. It keeps rising, keeps on coming back stronger. It's like a superhero in a comic book.
That's a really, really interesting question. I mean, that's a profound question. And I think
because we are not monolithic. The thing that we have in common, and I'm not being facetious when I say this, the thing that we have in common is that we are male and we are Black.
Okay.
Thank you, Chris, for sharing the video with us. I'm glad that we got a chance to watch so much of it, because I think it really speaks to kind of the way in which I think there is often there's a non-comprehensive nature, even as it is this very broad view of all of these different men and all of these different responses. In no way does it feel like this is Question Bridge exists as like a document to kind of speak to like a holistic, like the entirety of Black male experience. And I think you get that through the diversity of responses from all of these different participants. So as we kind of talk, I'm going to weave in some of the questions from the Q&A as well as my own questions into the conversation. And so I think a good one to kind of start with that we received is, how did you find the men who participated, and have you followed up with any of them since?
Yeah, well, you know, this is one of those questions that underscores the experimental process. I mean, it was one of those things that that happened because Hank and I really wanted it to happen. And so the very first men that came into the project came in because Hank had a speaking engagement in Birmingham, Alabama. And we thought that this is a place to start. So Hank and I and Bayate got on a plane. We had no one to speak to in Birmingham, but on the plane, on the link from Charlotte to Birmingham, I was sitting next to a Black man. And I thought, you know, we have to start somewhere. So this is an example of how the project came into being. So one of the things that's interesting about this dynamic is that Black men don't normally confront and talk to each other. And so I thought, well, how am I going to draw this man into a conversation and let him know about the project? He seemed kind of talkative. And so I finally said, gee, why are you going to Birmingham? And he said, well, you know, I'm running the concessions for an Alicia Keys concert. And I was waiting for him to ask me why I was going. And he said, gee, why are you going? I said, well, I'm doing this project, you know, it's an art project where Black men get to ask questions and answer questions of each other. So for example, do you have a question that you would love to ask another Black man who's very different from yourself? He said, yeah. I said, well, you could come to our motel room. And sure enough, he brought 6 guys to the hotel.
Oh, wow.
And we set up a screen and set up the camera and recorded those questions. And of course, the questions drive the process. So, you know, there's a different process for how you gather questions than there is for how you get answers. As I mentioned earlier, you know, some of the questions about freedom motivated me to figure out how to get into prisons so I could get answers to them. So, you know, you become driven by the project. And, you know, I would see men on the street and say, pull over, let me get this guy. And I can honestly say that in the 4 years that we spent working on this project, not one Black man, number one, didn't understand what we were doing and refused. Actually, that's not true. One Black man in New Orleans was too shy, but everybody else understood it and spontaneously contributed to it. So projects have a life of their own, and you know, that's certainly true for this one.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that? Did it occur to you at any point, did you have a conversation about it to start with yourselves? did you ever, it was, so just in thinking about the project too, in a sense of like, you know, this being in part a in part kind of a documentary, this documentarian project, did you ever, but you also, you and Hank, and by like you also as Black men, did you ever see yourself as part of this larger project as well? Did it ever occur to you to incorporate yourselves into it? And if not, then how did that decision come about as well?
Sure. This may seem like an abstract answer to your question, but the truth is, this project is ourselves. There wasn't any need for us to get in front of the cameras because we were integral to the nature of the project itself. And one of the things that sort of makes the project important to us was that we became as invisible as possible. We wanted the men to speak to each other and not feel as if they were answering to us as individuals. So anything that would give us the role of authorities or providing, you know, right questions and answers would have kind of spoiled the spontaneity of it. So no, we were very happy to be a channel for this methodology, this thing that we set in motion. And no, it never occurred to us to sit in front of the cameras. Ironically, the only time that I had that experience was in the original Question Bridge project, where one of the questions was that came from the community was, what does it feel like to marry a white woman? And you know, I had 8 weeks and $8,000 to do that original project, and so I didn't have a lot of time to scout around. And I happened to be married to a white woman at that time, so I answered that question myself. You know, maybe it's ironic, but I was divorced a few years later. But in any case, no, we never considered. Other than one instance where one of our team members got in front of the camera. And actually, Baite did answer a question later on when it became kind of a necessity. But in general, no. You know, we really felt that it was our honor to sort of be the carriers of the project, not necessarily needing to be part of it.
Were there any themes that came out of this project that were surprising to you? Like, did you go into the project kind of, I think in my own mind, if I were to think about starting a project of my own, there would probably be some assumptions on my part about some of the responses I would get, some of the things that would, you know, if I were to gather a group of, you know, 20 Black men together, these are sort of the things that would necessarily come up. But were there any things that, well, one, did you go in with that, did you also go in with that expectation? And then two, were there things that jumped out at you that maybe surprised you, that you saw in multiple participants that you weren't expecting?
Yeah, well, it's inevitable that you go into a project like this with a mindset about who you think Black men are. I mean, we all have stereotypical notions of what a Black man is. And I think you can understand now, even from that short segment, why the nature of the project is to disabuse you of any presumption you have about, you know, what a Black man must be. So there were surprises at every turn. There were questions that were so achingly poignant that it stopped me in our tracks. Like, for example, there was a young man in Algiers, across from New Orleans, who looked into the camera and said, I want to be a good person, but I'm surrounded by bad. I mean, how do you become a good person in that environment? I mean, he phrased it better than I did. And, you know, that became almost an anthem for the project for me. Getting answers to that question was really important. And I realized that there was a question about follow-up earlier. And, you know, the website is a way that we not only presented the whole of the project, things that didn't make it into the installation, back to the Black men. But as I mentioned, it also gave the Black men who used the mobile app an opportunity to ask and answer questions. So that created a loop that connects the Black men with each others. in ways that we couldn't do. The nature of the project, given how much money we had and the time constraints we had, we were never able to go back and do more than, acknowledge the men who were initially in it. And I still am in touch with a few of the ones who live in the Bay Area, but the project kind of has a life of its own.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this next question comes from the chat, and it says, how did you get the footage of participants listening to the answers to their questions?
Oh, okay. Well, this gives me a perfect opportunity to acknowledge the person who actually did the editing of the piece, because a lot of what you're responding to are the aesthetics of the pacing, so visualizing how the project came into being. So you can imagine that Hank is maybe to the right of the person with a little computer aiming at the person so they can see the person who's going to be giving the question. So the person sitting in front of the camera is looking to the right or to the left like that. And I'm behind the camera filming them. And I, understood that I needed as much handles is what they're called, as much footage in and out. So I recorded everything. So Rosa White, who was the editor, took all of those instances of people looking to the right and to the left and edited them into the sort of montage, of the piece itself, the choreography of it. So it looks as if a person on the left is looking to the right at another person, but that's really just an illusion of time and space.
I think something that jumps out at me at that question that is special about the project is we are given this space with Question Bridge we're given this entryway into the interiority of Black male-male relationships that we aren't often given. It's like it's such a privilege in certain ways, because I think it speaks to a level of comfortability and vulnerability that Black men have with one another when there are no women present, when there are no when white people aren't present as well. Is that in some ways, is that part of the heart of what you were trying to capture with this project, is thinking about how these relationships unfold through dialogue and through kind of the passage of information, the passage of advice or wisdom from one Black man to another, and what that dynamic is like, and kind of capturing that visually. Is that would you say that, does that speak to you?
Yeah.
Or would you speak about it, I guess? Yeah.
Sure. Well, you just beautifully summarized the conceptual framework of the whole project. If you go back to those cars with the kids in them, with a badge around their necks that said "Shut up and listen," I mean, that was intended to create, a fictive, safe space for people to speak as if they were free. I mean, the idea for that goes back to, some of you might remember an old TV show, Get Smart, where there was, I see Michelle shaking her head. So there was something called the cone of silence. It was a gimmick within that show. So when Suzanne and I were trying to figure out how to make The Roof is on Fire work, I visualized this cone coming down. So even in a crowded room, because of the technology, you were totally by yourselves. And in that safe space, you were free to communicate freely. So I love the fact that that space gave you permission to be a more honest version of yourself. So we thought we could recreate that with the cars, and all of Question Bridge is intended to do precisely that. It's me, and hopefully the person feels safe with me behind the camera, and they're willing to address a question to me, looking at the lens as if that lens represents the person they're speaking to. Our hope was, and it proved to be true, that they would feel safe enough to be more honest than they would be if the person that they are addressing were physically there. So we did everything we could to create an opportunity for the kind of active generosity that asking a question actually is. I mean, I described listening as a passive way to be generous. An active way to be generous is to ask a question, and we hope that the safety of the mini studio that we created, plus the fact that you're simply asking a question. I mean, that's a very deceptively innocent thing to do, to ask someone a question. But obviously what you're doing when you ask someone a question is you're setting yourself up to listen to their answer. So I hoped that that dynamic would work, and you saw how that played out. And we did everything we could to make the space feel safe. Like, for example, Kamal, traveled with us, spent a lot of time with us, but we couldn't have her anywhere near where we were working, because if there were any women anywhere in the environment,
it fundamentally changes the project. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm going to ask another from the chat, and this one is, I'm curious about the future of Question Bridge Black Males. Where do we go from here? It cannot just end here, is what was said. So what is I think we got a little bit of, we got more examples, obviously, in your presentation at the beginning of how the project kind of lives on its own through curricula and through the website. But I do think that is something interesting in thinking about too, just kind of not only the current climate that we're all in, but also just even looking at the format of this conversation right now with all of us in these little squares on Zoom. It seems like there is the possibility of thinking about the same level of kind of admission and divulgence in kind of a media space. So I don't know if you've thought about it at all. Now seems like a particularly fertile time to go back to this project, especially in the way that it was kind of constructed. What are your thoughts?
Oh, well, as you said, the whole reason for creating the curriculum was so that not only the dynamic of the Question Bridge project itself, but the content that comes from sharing the voices of those Black men with young people has a continuing life in the classrooms that the teachers use it in. And so the fact that we were able to, working together with the Harvey Gantt Center, as I mentioned in Charlotte, get it formally integrated into the Charlotte-Mecklenburg school system is just a start. My ambition is for it to be in schools all over the country. And so that's how the content of Question Bridge Black Males will propagate. I mean, that's certainly happening over the website and in the classrooms. But the other part of that is the project itself, the methodology, has been applied to Black males, but it can relate to any demographic. I mean, one of the concepts that I've been promoting from the very beginning was that any group of people are nominally belonging to each other, but they're also divided by critical issues that a Question Bridge process could help build connections. And so I'm aware of Question Bridge spin-offs that are happening. People sometimes let me know, sometimes they don't, which is fine. One of the things that I've been promoting is Question Bridge White Women in America. Obviously, I can't be in the forefront of that project, so there's a team of really gifted women, journalists and writers who are sort of doing that. It's sort of interesting that the inspiration for that was the discovery that 53% of white women voted for Donald Trump. And I couldn't find one white woman amongst my friends who could explain why that was true. And so I thought, well, you folks need to do a Question Bridge. You've got a big division there. You don't understand each other. Maybe this will help. And if you go to questionbridgewhitewomen.com, you'll see that some of the work that they've done. But that's the way not only the content of the Question Bridge Black Males project, but hopefully the concept of Question Bridge itself will continue long after me.
How has, and this relates to one of the questions that was just dropped into the chat, but how has the project been received and functioned internationally? We've talked a lot about seeing this project here in the States, and specifically seeing it, at the Oakland Museum and at the Smithsonian, but what has been the reception in other places? I know that is also something I think about a lot, like in my own professional capacity at MOAD, is sort of, these conversations between Black folks in in the United States and the continent and South America and, you know, all these different areas. So I was wondering, how has it been received? What has that been like in other parts of the world?
Yeah, you know, it's almost magical the way that projects propagate overseas. So the Los Angeles Film Festival made the piece kind of famous within the documentary world. So we were invited to the Sheffield Documentary Film Festival in England, and that was very well received. And then I got a email from a pair of women in England when Brexit was really a hot issue. They thought that a question bridge process would help people in Great Britain better understand what is dividing them about belonging or not belonging to the European Union. So they created the question bridge across the distance between Wales and London. So those are the ones that I'm aware of. But I'm also aware, you know, that there are critical divisions among demographics all over the world. And I would love for this idea to continue to grow. But those are the ones that I'm aware of.
Mm-hmm. Are there any communities that you, I mean, obviously you've spoken about Question Bridge White Women, which is fascinating. I will have to check out after to see kind of what that conversation has germinated. But are there any communities that you think of right now that you think could be especially useful for, in terms of just this specific, I guess I will speak to my own, what I'm thinking specifically in terms of where we are right now, but thinking a lot about obviously we're talking a lot about publicly about anti-Black violence, but thinking about anti-trans violence as well, and sort of how there are these specific communities that might really benefit from having a project like this. Are there any, have you thought about any other additional kind of iterations that this could take in terms of different communities that you're particularly interested in or interested in seeing?
Yeah. I mean, I've been working for the past few years on a video project related to creative placemaking, and it's taken me to many, many parts of the country. But one of the communities that I'm working with in that context is the Native American community. I did a lot of filming at the Zuni Pueblo in New Mexico, and it occurred to me that it would just be fascinating to see what would happen if a question bridge process were used among Native American people, those who choose to live a tribal life and those who don't. I mean, I'm so sensitive to the fact that we live our lives on sacred land that we stole from Native American peoples. So from afar, you know, from the distance of being a Black man, not related to the Native American community, I mean, I've always been fascinated by the idea of what would happen if you were to do a question bridge in that context. But the harder answer to that question is, it's hard for me to think of a community that wouldn't benefit from a question bridge. I mean, question bridge Black women would be a fascinating thing. I mean, I would definitely go to see that. But like the White Women Project, that's something that I could, you know, promote, but I can't do it. You know, that's something that that community, that demographic would have to do themselves. All I could do is kind of spiritual advisor.
So we have about 5 minutes left. So I want to, there's one more question that came up in the chat that we spoke a bit about, Chris, the other day when we were kind of preparing for today. And so I definitely want to address it. It was one of my questions as well. But wondering if the topic of toxic masculinity came up in their conception of their questions, which is not to demonize masculine attributes, but to acknowledge and complicate problems of masculinity in general in a multi-gendered world.
Yeah, well, you know, I guess Socrates said an unexamined life is not worth living. And so it's not surprising, you know, that right at the very beginning of the project, you see a Black man saying, what does it mean to be a Black man? And what ramifies throughout the whole project is this inquiry about what are the consequences of us adopting those stereotypes of masculinity Like, for example, you saw that come up around the question of smartness. You saw how constrained Black men are by the stereotype of how Black men expect to relate to not just the reality of their communities, but to themselves. And so I would say that that issue of the toxic nature of masculine stereotypes is a deep and pervasive problem that Question Bridge Black Males hopefully not only unpacks, but I hope that people who come into the presence of Question Bridge with one notion of what a Black man and what Black masculinity looks like is, leave with an altered notion of what it means to be a Black male. I mean, that's our intentional goal in doing this project. We said that to each other over and over again. We wanted to change the way people perceive Black males, and hopefully it's doing that.
So I actually lied, and there's one more question, and this will be the actual last question. And actually, I'm very excited to be able to pass the mic a little bit to Michelle Branch, because I think her last question is going to generate a very interesting dialogue between two former and current board presidents of Camerawork. So please, Michelle, take it away.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you so much for your moderation today. I want to credit Elena actually, because it was Elena's idea that we have a movie night or a matinee movie afternoon with Chris. And so I want to thank you, Elena, for helping us to curate this project today, and also for your moderation, which is fantastic. So Chris, I have a new Question Bridge project for you, which is president to president. So we have a commonality, but we have a time divide. I'm actually just really curious about your experience as the former board president of San Francisco Camerawork. If many of you don't know, Chris, again, was the board president of San Francisco Camerawork during a really important transitional time. And he was president for 7 years. So Chris, I would love to hear from you, just your experiences, your memories of Camerawork, if you don't mind. I think it's a really important history to bring forth.
So embedded in your question are you asking, how do you survive as a president for 7 years? Is that part of your question? No, I'm only kidding. No, I mean, the important thing, Michelle, is to recognize that Camerawork is an organization, that's created by artists for artists in the photo community. I think I mentioned in the statement that I wrote for you that it's not a surprise that the F64 group was born within like 10 miles of where I live, because this is such a fertile area of creativity around photography. So it's not surprising that in a time when Lou Thomas and Donnelly Phillips and Hal Fisher and Arthur Ullman and we're all working here as young artists with new ideas to push against the assumptions of the gallery world, the commercial gallery world, and the assumptions of collectors, traditional collectors, the assumptions of the still living icons of photography, the Ansel Adamses and Imogen Cunninghams. Those people were still alive and still a big influence. There needed to be a counter to that. So Camerawork emerged out of that necessity. How I became president, I don't know. I mean, I know approximate reasons, I know that Arthur Ullman said, you should be president of this organization. And I said, well, me, but it happened to be a time when the organization needed to make a really big transition from a kind of bootstrap organization that was actually run by all of the membership. So we would try on the one hand to get as many members as possible for the financial support we needed, but then we had to caucus all of them if we wanted to make any crucial decisions. So you'll be grateful to know, that one of the first mandates I came into was, how do we get the membership to vote to disenfranchise themselves so that we could run it in a more coherent way. So I had, specific challenges like that in order to move it toward a vision of what a modern, functioning, art-run artist organization could be. We needed to create conventions like for example, portfolio reviews and the auction. I mean, we needed ways to make money. The hotel tax fund was just coming into being, and so we needed to figure out how to get into that loop. You know, the opera was already there, but how do we get, you know, on that list? So there were lots of very specific things that needed to be done, and for some reason people thought that I could be helpful. And I guess the closing of that era was when we hired Marnie Gillette, you know, who really should be remembered for how powerful and wonderful a influence. We hired her and Gene Finley to be the directors and assistant directors, and that's when I stepped down. So when the organization coalesced to the point where it felt like it could stand on its own, we needed to find a new venue. That was another big challenge that Marty and I took on. And so, you know, that era had those challenges, and now you have the challenges that belong to you. And I'm really happy to see that you're there, and be glad to help in any way that I can.
Chris, thank you so much. Your support means a tremendous amount. We have a lot of respect for you, and it sounds as though from everything you're saying, there's much more of a discussion there to be had in history. That might be another interview with Chris at a later point, but you really put some really important structural projects on the map for Camerawork. I'm starting to think that we wouldn't be here where we are today without you. So I want to thank you for that. I'm sure many other people do as well. One of the reasons, by the way, I wanted to say, just going back to the Instagram Takeover series to let people know about that again, is Chris is one of the artists. He was the first artist because, you know, he's like a dean of San Francisco Camerawork. So we wanted to have him go first through this call and response series. There are 7 other artists as well who you can check out, and we'll be having more programming and talks with them as well. So Chris, thank you. I'm going to hand this back over to Dave at this point. But thank you so much, Elena and Chris. Really grateful to you both.
Thank you, Michelle. I was actually just texting you to say, just take us out. You got this. Elena, thank you for being a part of Camerawork now and our future. Chris, thank you for being a part of who we are. What you did in the 80s is still a part of who we are today. Michelle, thank you for your leadership as we go forward. It's humbling for me to be a part of this organization as a board member and as an interim director. Thanks to all of you who are here today. Thanks to Christina Graber for helping us to produce this as always. And I hope to see all of you, especially you, Chris. I think we could talk for a long time, and we definitely want your help going forward. Thank you all for being here. This community is Camerawork. I hope to see you all again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Good to see you all.
Yes, thank you all so much. Thank you, Camerawork, for everything.